Before I begin today, I want to say a couple words. One is that I always love reading that gospel, especially when it comes to that God knows every hair on your head, because he must know me fairly well, I guess, because there's only one or two up here, if any. The other is that on the eve of my anniversary, Susan and I will be married 24 years tomorrow, and Patrick was at that wedding and it took, yes, and we're still happily married even under the stress of renovating a condominium, but we are so thankful to be here at Christ Church, and we are so thankful to be a part of this greater family. And Susan, thank you for your tireless support of who I am and who you've made me become and helped me become, and I love you and thank you for that. And then on this Father's Day, I'm so deeply honored to be the father of Colville and Cooper. And Colville, if you're watching out there, Cooper, you are at 9 o'clock. But if you're watching out there, Colville, I love you and thank you for being a great son, and Cooper for being a great daughter. Extremely proud of the two of you. So with that, I want to share a story that about 5 years ago, I was called to Washington, D.C. For a church meeting. I was currently serving as the dean of the cathedral in Oklahoma, and we were gathering some people there for a meeting. And I didn't know the agenda of the meeting until I got there and realized that I had, on the second day of being there, a whole afternoon off. And so my brother and sister-in-law lived in Virginia, right outside of D.C. at the time. And so on that morning of the second day, when I had the afternoon off, I called Jason and said, hey, are you able to get away from work? I would love to go explore D.C. a little bit. And he was not able to get away from work, and so, but Shannon was able to get away, and she came and picked me up, and we decided to go to the National African American History Museum. It was newly opened, probably about 6 or 8 months that it had been opened, and we were looking forward to going. And we got there, and there was no line, and we were real surprised by that. And so we went up to the security officer that was guarding the empty line, and we said, are there tickets available? Can we get in? And he said, oh no, that line ended about 7 o'clock this morning with all the tickets being handed out for the day. He said, you can reserve a ticket, but it will be about 6 to 9 months from now that you would have to come back to actually view the collection in the museum. I was kind of taken aback by that. I didn't realize that it was such a popular venue. But at the same time that interchange was happening with the security guard, a young black couple came up and they had 4 pieces of paper in their hand, and they handed 2 of those pieces of paper to the security guard, and they were 2 tickets. And the security guard immediately turned and gave those tickets to Shannon and I. And so my sister-in-law and I were able to go in and view the museum. The great thing is that the young couple that gave us the tickets, the gift of just being able to go inside, they kind of hung out with us throughout our time that we were touring, especially at the beginning part, and they were sharing stories with us of their own life and what it was like to live as a black American, and that was just so interesting to me. When you arrive into the main part of the museum, it's this big cavernous space, and it's very light and bright, and a beautiful beautiful venue above ground. And you take an escalator downstairs, and you enter into a 30-foot by 30-foot by 30-foot cube elevator. It's all glass, and so you go down 6 floors beneath the surface of the earth, and you feel like you're traveling back in time, because you really are. It gets darker and darker as you travel down, down, and down. And along the walls of the elevator shaft are dates and events that have happened throughout our U.S. history related to African Americans, and some of the most significant dates. And so it was very moving literally moving to go down 6 floors, and you arrive with kind of a jolt of the elevator, and you're able to get out. And the first part of the museum is about the beginning of the slave trade. and how that all started and what that all meant, and how the United States was formed around the economy, was formed around the slaves that came into our country that were brought here, and what happened to them in Africa and the travel across the Atlantic. It was very moving and powerful, and you walk up the 6 floors that you just went down in kind of a spiral, and viewing different parts of the museum and parts of our history as you go. And I got to about the 5th floor, I think it was, and it was 1921 was the day, the year, and it was about the Tulsa Race Massacre, which, I had lived in Oklahoma at that time for about 4 or so years, and I had never heard anything about the Tulsa Massacre. Nothing. No one talks about it in Oklahoma. It's not even in the history books that are taught in the schools in Oklahoma. And so I paused there and read every bit of what was talked about in that section of the museum, and it was pretty jarring. It disturbed me and moved me in a way that I really felt like when I got back to Oklahoma, I needed to take the trek from Oklahoma City to Tulsa and walk the Greenwood district of Tulsa just to see where this horrific event had taken place. On May 31st and June 1st of 1921, a white mob went into the black neighborhood of Greenwood, which was known as the Black Wall Street, a very wealthy, the wealthiest black neighborhood in the whole United States, where people were prestigious doctors, nurses, attorneys, economists, and investors, and a very prosperous area. And a white mob came in and began to burn down that part of the city. And overhead, private planes were flying over and dropping kerosene on top of that in order to make the fire grow even more significantly. It's known that about 350 people lost their lives in that massacre that day, but all of them were buried in unmarked graves, so the number is unknown to this day. And close to about 10,000 people were then taken away from Greenwood and placed in internment camps until they could find their own places to live. A horrific day in our history that, again, no one knows a whole lot about and is not taught in Oklahoma. 99 years later, in the legislature of Oklahoma in 2020, this past legislative session, the lawmakers of Oklahoma passed a law that says that the history books that high school students and middle school and elementary students will read has to include now the history of what happened on May 31st and June 1st, 1921. Took us 99 years to get there, but finally, some of the students in Oklahoma and hopefully beyond will begin to learn about this horrific day. But I was disturbed by all of that, and as I was reading the lesson, the gospel lesson for this day, the language that Jesus uses in this gospel as he's teaching his disciples what it's going to be like to be a disciple of Jesus. And that's really what he's saying. He's called the disciples together, and now he's saying, to follow along what we learned last week, he's saying, this is what it's going to be like. There's going to be trials and tribulations. There's going to be challenges. People are going to disagree with you. You're not going to be loved by everybody. But there's also going to be great times where the message of God's peace and grace and love, which Jesus represents, and the salvation that he represents, will actually take hold in people. And people will come to know this incredible gift that Jesus is by God to the world. And so he's challenging his disciples and saying that, and saying it in a way that could be kind of disturbing. There's language about slave and master. There's the language about the sword, and that he wasn't going to come to bring peace, but he came to bring a sword. But all of that is, I think, there to actually make an impression on us, to help us realize that, the whole slave and master piece is, and teacher and learner and student is this whole idea that we're all in this together. Jesus wanted everyone to get into this message of peace and love and grace that he brought in salvation. And so that piece I could wrap my head around, but then I got to that place of the whole sword idea, and the whole idea that Jesus came to bring peace. And with what's going on in our country right now, and in light of what I've been reading and learning related to the Tulsa massacre and the plight and struggles of African Americans in our country, I was thinking to myself, what does that sword look like? What does Christ's sword look like? And I came to the realization it doesn't look like the white mob on May 31st and June 1st of 1921. But what it looks like is a known as the cross, piercing my heart and soul, and removing from me the sin that keeps me from being fully a disciple. That Jesus has come to redeem me of those things that I hold dear that might hurt other people. And I was really convicted by that this week. That really there are things within our culture and society that Jesus is saying to us, we've got to pierce them with the sword of God's compassion, love, grace, and salvation and forgiveness. That there are parts of our culture and our systems that maybe need to be disturbed a little bit as we're disturbed in this time of COVID-19 and an economic downturn and in the midst of Black Lives Matter. As we're disturbed a little bit by all of this, that maybe we need to ask the question, are we disturbed enough to do something about it? These systems that we have lived within that are oppressive to some of our population, are we willing to stand up and say that this needs to be changed? Are we willing to stand up and say, as a disciple of Jesus Christ, that Jesus is about love and compassion, grace, equality, and equity? What does that look like for us? And so those questions flooded into me, and I don't know if I have the answers at all about what this will look like, but I know that this is my Father's world, and I can trust in God, and that God will lead us through. And I do know this, and I want to challenge you this day with this as well. That in this time of separation, in this time of being at home, in this time of great strife and pain within our country and the world, in this time of health crisis and illness, in this time of struggles within our economy, which experts are saying is going to take close to 9 years to recover from. And within this time where we are struggling with the racial tensions of Black Lives Matter and what that means, and claiming our history and owning that more and more, and looking at what that looks like in the future, I want to partner with you and work together to say to ourselves, what is it that before this all happened that we just took for granted? And what is it that we need to take the sword of Christ's love and grace and pierce it out of our lives and make room for new possibilities where Jesus can transform us as his loving disciples? Now, I can't do that for you. You can't do that on your own as well. We need Christ in us to be able to do that. We need to figure out how we can pause for a moment in this time and really ask the tough questions of how have I been complicit in these systems? How have I enjoyed these systems? And how have those oppressed others? And what might need to change? It starts in my own heart, in your own heart, in our souls and in our minds. God can transform us. Jesus can transform us. And when we say that we are disciples of Jesus, we can take up our cross and sacrificially love like Jesus did. We can forgive like Jesus did. We can walk through these tough times with trust and confidence that God is with us. And we then can come out the other side with a deeper knowledge of how to love and live as Christians in this world. And may we never forget or push underneath the surface the history that is behind us, so that we can learn about how we can go forward from this day. Amen.